Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast. Time to hashtag everything. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media. From Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Welcome to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Staci. And for our first story, I don't know if it's just me or if it's actually the case. It feels like we've talked about Cardi B a number of times. Like almost every episode feels like something about Cardi B. But this one feels like the culmination, because we first started talking about Cardi B because she was pregnant, and she's now no longer pregnant. Cardi B and Offset have welcomed their first child, a daughter, whom they named Culture Kiari Cephas, except Culture is spelled with a K. Not sure why exactly the K is, and this is obviously a bit interesting of a name. There are some people who are suggesting this maybe has something to do with Offset's group Migos, because their previous two episodes were called Culture and Culture 2, but actually spelled with a C. So it's not clear what the K from Culture comes from. But the parents' real name, Cardi B's real name, and I'm just probably going to butcher this because I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, is Bacalis Marlinis Almanza. And her sister's name is Hennessy, and that's evidently where her stage name comes from, because her sister's name is Hennessy, people used to call her Bacardi, and so she turned that around to be Cardi B. Offset's real name is Kiari Kendrell Cephas, so that's where the daughter's middle name comes from. But I do just love that, Cardi B had this magazine shoot when she was pregnant in the just most, let's make this as glamorous as possible way. She's not really wearing anything, but her makeup's very stylish, and the styling behind her is very stylish. And now it's just like, yes, I don't want anyone else to have the same name as my child. And I feel this is not typical exactly, but I think you do kind of hear about this more for celebrities than anyone else, just because they're celebrities. So there probably are, really random people out in the middle of the country whose parents were like, I'm going to name you something, quite a bit out there, but we just don't hear about them because they're not celebrities. My name is simple, although not the typical spelling you necessarily see of Staci. And it kind of feels, given my mother's name and my sister's name, that even though, of course, my mother did not name herself, that we were going for my child needs to be able to spell their name by the time they get into kindergarten. We all have names that can be spelled more than one way, and we all have the shortest version of those spellings, because let's just be simple. Let's not go crazy. But I do congratulate Cardi B and Offset on their child. And just because we've been talking about it, hope that we don't talk about Cardi B for a while, because I can't think of anything where it would be a positive, and therefore I'm afraid it would be a negative. And so I just kind of want us to take a Cardi B break. I don't mind, though, if we don't take a interesting name break. I thought about this because I kind of had to, because when I was in school, as part of our, health classes, we had to, have a sort of fake baby for a while. Ours were made out of flour. Not made out of flour, I shouldn't say that. Ours were flour bags. Other schools have done it with eggs. Other schools actually have, the baby doll that actually cries and possibly does other things to sort of, teach children this is what it's like to have to care for a child. And I, at the time, totally did think, okay, well, now I have to have this fake baby. What would I name them? I don't want it to be like the way some of my friends were, where we had to start calling them, Andrew M and Andrew R or Elizabeth S or whatever, because there were multiple of them in the classroom. I thankfully have not actually had that. I definitely didn't have that in school. I've only met maybe 3 or 4 other Stacies, and none of them spell it the way I spell it. So I feel, even though Staci is not it's not a strange name, it's not a very out there name, but it is uncommon enough that I'm like, yes, it's mine. It's just mine. No one else has it. That's not true, but it feels that way for most of the time. So I'm just like, I'm Staci and I'm the only Staci, and I feel special for that. For my children, I would want to name them something like Staci. I mean, not by the name wise, but by the commonality wise of common enough that, people will know how to pronounce it. Most likely upon first viewing, you don't have to say, this is how you say my name, but also uncommon enough that it's not, okay, now you're Staci whatever of the class, and there's that other Staci. Oh, and that's Staci in our PE class as well. Sort of a wonderful middle ground. So anyways, we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast. I believe I've mentioned previously, if not on this podcast, on a different podcast, that I don't quite understand people who want to have a record simply to have a record, unless it's for sports. And since I'm not athletic, I never even got anywhere near approaching, okay, I have to get the record time or score, or I don't even know how else you measure things in sports. So it would have to be something a little unusual for me if I was ever going to be able to get a record. It would have to be something you don't normally hear of and wouldn't necessarily think, yes, of course there must be a record for that. But I most definitely would not want to do it the way this next story has, in that the man with the world's longest fingernails has finally cut them off after 66 years. So you can just right away imagine, if you have not cut your fingernails for 66 years, how long those must be. His nails, and they were different just by the fingers. They weren't all the same length, because I guess your fingers grow differently. I've never actually thought about that, but now I'm interested. His nails ranged from 164.5 centimeters to 197.8 centimeters. They had a combined length of 909.6 centimeters. And I know we don't usually use some centimeters here. 909, that's over 29, 30 feet. That's fingernails. And I mean, obviously you'd have to lay them, end to end, but just, can you imagine? Like, I've seen women who have long, fake fingernails put on, And I'm just like, I don't know how you like do almost anything with those, and I wear contacts, so I have to put my contacts in my eyes and take them out. I most definitely cannot do that with those nails, but even if I didn't, how do you just, open bottles? I don't know how you do it. So this man started letting his nails grow out in 1952 because evidently he was told off by a teacher for accidentally breaking one. And he did this. He had the nails cut at Ripley's Believe It or Not, and I believe he's either been on their show or something, had some previous association with them. But he did actually manage to, even though it would not seem it, and if you've seen these pictures, his thumbnail is actually like curled up and tied. I'm not sure if that was the thumbnail just ended up curling up itself or if that was just the only way to deal with it. He actually managed to work as a photographer because he had a customized handle made for the camera. So he was actually able to, work for the past 66 years or so. But because he had these really long nails, and because with nails that long, you can't make a fist, obviously. Because of the years and the weight of those nails, his left hand is actually permanently handicapped. And he can't open it from a closed position or even flex his fingers. And I'm just like, what was the thought process here? Again, I don't fully understand the thought process behind some record winner holder people. So it's just like, why did you continue this for so long? The only reason I can think of is for the record, but I don't quite understand why you'd want that specific record. Like, he has actually said that his hand is constantly in pain and that he has this like constant burning pain from it. And I'm just like, when that started, why didn't you be like, you know what, this is not worth it? Like, never mind the not being able to use my left hand. And he said he actually, like, when he was sleeping, he had to be very careful while sleeping because they're evidently somewhat fragile. And he had, I think, a bag or something that he kind of put them in while sleeping. And I'm just like, I don't know that that's worth it to me. It does. I get why Ripley's Believe It or Not is involved in this, and the nails will evidently now be on display at Ripley's Believe It or Not, because that totally sounds like something that would be like, that's just a almost, well, duh sort of situation. Of course, you would have the cut off longest fingernails at Ripley's Believe It or Not. Where else would you put them? Obviously. But it is a little strange, and I could not find, at least, why exactly he kept going for so long. People on social media, of course, a lot of them were like, dude, that's ridiculous, and or you're a moron, because now again his hand is permanently handicapped, and that just seems not quite worth it just for a record. Some people are speculating that there's money involved, that he, is maybe getting paid by Ripley's Believe It or Not, that there was some sort of deal made with Ripley's, and that's why he continued growing his nails. But that deal would have had to have been, a long time ago, because he's been growing them since 1952, and I'm not even sure if Ripley's existed in 1952. I feel like, and I'm conflating Barnum and Bailey with Ripley's for some reason. So it may have, I don't know, but it's just very, very strange, very odd, very individualistic, certainly, although there are other people, because of course these pictures came up with this story because of course they did. How could they not? There are other people with really, really long fingernails, to the point that, again, can't make a fist. Not sure how you do anything, but supposedly you do somehow manage to, go on and go through life with those nails. But yeah, you can find pictures of them. Just, you know, even if you type in world's longest fingernails, even if it's not this gentleman who comes up, you can find pictures of different people with the longest, and it's just like, hey, I didn't even know my body could do that, because it almost feels sort of physically impossible. Like, doesn't your body, I mean, not stops making fingernails, but considering what fingernails are made of, and I don't break them all the time, but I always break them eventually at some point, so that it becomes really annoying. And so I'm like, how long can I grow them before I break them? That's generally my goal, and it doesn't get very long. So I never actually have the problem of I don't know how to deal with my nails, because my nails will eventually break off. I don't know. And I actually have, you know, somewhat good nails considering in my family, but it didn't even seem, they're sort of, this gentleman's nails, I mean, are sort of brownish colored to the point that it's almost like, those are fingernails? Really? I feel this is like some strange fossil bone-ish thing that we found in, like, you know, a somewhat swampy place, even though I don't think that's how that a swampy place would still have bones because of the climate and moisture. But it just feels, I believe that this is real, irregardless of the Ripleys believe it or not, but I can't quite wrap my mind over how this has happened, and more importantly, why. Not sure why he grew them forever, not sure why he cut them off either, except that maybe the pain just got to be too much to him. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will have a not as painful story, hopefully. So stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast. Before I get into our final story, just a little bit of background. I don't really drive, and I don't really care to drive, and I don't really like most drivers, because it feels like, and I know this is very typical, that, you know, oh, things used to be so much better back into time here, and now things are, you know, going to hell in a handbasket or whatever. I'm sure that's probably not the case, and, you know, every era had its own terribleness, but it does feel, I'm even falling into this of like, man, people cannot drive nowadays. People are just terrible drivers nowadays, when I'm sure that's, you know, statistics would probably not necessarily bear that out. But because of that, and because I don't drive and therefore ride the bus, if I have to cross the street to get to the bus stop, I'm very aware of the other cars, just because the cars don't seem to be super aware of me. Like, there are a number of times where they're just like, oh, what? Pedestrian? Oh, there might be a person along the street who's not in a speeding, moving metal vehicle. I've never seen such a thing. And it's just like, yes, there are pedestrians and, you know, these sidewalks, and you see these lines on the ground. These are crosswalks, and this is where pedestrians walk. And why is this so surprising? And you go too fast, and or some of them just won't even let me cross at all. So rude. But anyways, is what makes me really, really interested in our final story today, which is that several countries around the world in an attempt to get cars to slow down, have started installing 3D crosswalks. And they're not 3D in that they're actual, 3D physical dimensions. They just look 3D, and these are actually really cool. And I don't know, I never quite figure out how artists, I don't think very visually, so I never quite understand how artists can know just how the measurements of things to make them seem real and not just a drawing or whatever. These look like usually floating white bars. It's kind of hard to describe if you haven't seen them. They are painted in such a way that they have the white lines that you're used to from crosswalks, to the point that, outside of, I want to say the US, but maybe this is a regionalism. I'm not sure. Certainly in other countries, they call them zebras instead of crosswalks because it's white lines on a black background. You definitely have the white bars, but then you also have this sort of painted shadow looking thing to make it seem like the white bars are floating or levitating. And the white bars themselves are painted to look like they're not just, a however many inches by however many inches white box, but they're painted to look like an actual 3D object. And then they've got this shadow that makes it look like they're floating. And of course, this only works if you're viewing it from a certain angle, because if you see it from another angle, you're like, obviously that's painted, but it's painted to be that from the oncoming car's perspective, it looks like there's floating blocks in the road. And there's a hope that this will cause drivers to slow down, because obviously that's not something you're used to. And things that you actually think are physically in the road, you're like, wait, I don't want to hit that. Let me slow down. So this has actually been installed in a number of places: in Iceland, in Baghdad, in Mozambique, and in Montreal. I don't know that it's yet been tried anywhere in the United States, but I think that would be really cool. I know we do hear a lot of times, even on residential streets, the speed bumps to try and get people to slow down. And I now wonder if there is a speed bump crosswalk. I'm not sure. But I also really like, and I may have mentioned it on this podcast or another one, the Bolivian zebras, which are actual people in zebra costumes in Bolivia who sort of act as crosswalk guards / dancing entertainment. This was a thing that's been going on now in Bolivia for a number of years, where in an effort to get cars to slow down again at crosswalks, because those are dangerous, and why this effort needs to be taken, I don't understand. But in an effort to get cars to slow down at crosswalks, people dressed up in zebra costumes, because they're called zebras, and, would either walk out into the middle, or in order to have fun with this, also kind of, dance around while walking out into the middle to get the car to slow down or to stop and let other people cross or what have you. And I'm just like, that is very smart. That is very clever. Well done. And also, I'm hoping somewhere in America there is some very interesting just sort of way of trying to get cars to slow down, because the closest I've ever seen where I live is just those volunteer crosswalk. I think they're volunteer. They might be paid. I'm not sure. Crosswalk guards near schools when, the schools get out or whatever. So, and they have the little stop sign that they walk out with to make the cars stop so the kids can cross. That's about it. I don't know that I've ever seen certainly nothing as interesting as a 3D crosswalk or a dancing zebra to try and get cars to slow down. And I'm not sure. I'm hoping this works. Certainly the zebras seem to have had an effect in Bolivia. I'm a little afraid with the 3D crosswalks if maybe the drivers might just get used to it and so stop seeing it anymore, or their brain just immediately is like, oh, I know that's not real, and so they get back to speeding. But hopefully this will have a good permanent effect, and I'd like to see it if it was installed in other places. And so on that note, we're going to end for today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.